Hello, welcome back. I'm going to talk about the March-April 2019 issue of Analog Science Fiction and Fact magazine. Once again, talk about some of the stories that I really enjoyed in the hopes that you might want to check the magazine out for yourself and you might enjoy the stories and some of the other ones as well and maybe become a science fiction fan that way. I want to start talking about a novelette called Under a Red Sun by James Glass, which was a story about a group of explorers on an alien world with barely an atmosphere at all, but signs that there might have been one. I thought this was a well written story. It had some really good descriptions of alien geology, which I really enjoyed. Um, Another one was Hop and Hop with Gleep Glop Gleep by Tim McDaniel. That was a story about a group of non human aliens. It was a very fun story that was actually written like a kid's picture book and included a lot of really fun illustrations. As a new dad, I really enjoyed that, although, quite honestly, the story would probably give your kid nightmares, and give my kid nightmares, anyways. Uh, Negotiating Traffic by Jay Pressler. Smart cars are everywhere, programmed to avoid obstacles, but what about the trolley experiment? What if cars had to pick between hitting you and, say, a bus full of kids? It's a very clever story. If you're not familiar with the trolley experiment, check out the episode of The Good Place called The Trolley Experiment because it really has a brilliant takedown of what the trolley experiment is about. Basically, you're the driver of a trolley car that is coming down the tracks, and you see ahead of you one person, uh, and you have the option to go off the main track and go onto a side rail. But if you do, you're going to hit three people. And which way would you go? It's a great experiment. It's a great thought process. And this particular story by Tim McDaniel, or pardon me, by Jay Pressler, was kind of a fun take on it. Second Quarter and Counting by James Van Pelt. I always enjoy James Van Pelt stories. He's a Colorado guy, so tends to put Colorado references in his stories, and that's always a lot of fun. This one was a fun and charming story about some friends in their 70s considering an age reduction therapy. Actually, kind of reminded me of the Twilight Zone episode "The Trade-Ins," where the elderly couple has the chance to transfer their minds into younger, athletic, robotic bodies. It was a very touching Twilight Zone episode, and this was a very touching story, Second Quarter and Counting by James Van Pelt. Um, Dangerous Company by C. Stewart Hardwick was another fun story about two folks stranded on the moon when their lander crashed. Of course, their lander crashed because of one of the two people, so that made for an interesting dynamic between the two of them. Tea Time with Aliens by Jack McDevitt involves an alien encounter on Earth. Robotic visitors come to Earth and claim that most intelligent species in the universe wipe themselves out. Only roughly 1% of intelligent species survive. And there's something that that 1% all has in common that was very interesting to read. It was a lot of fun to read, I thought. Um, Bud Sparhawk's The Invitation, which was a story I think inspired by Stephen Hawking's 2009 party that he threw for time travelers, the invitations to which were sent after the party had taken place. It was a story that was clearly influenced by that. Robert Scherer's editorial, who's a physics professor, talks about the scientific process, come up with a theory, then test it for validity, versus the science fiction writing process. Describes how science fiction writing has to differ from science writing and how authors need to find kind of that sweet spot between too, boring scientific stuff and out there crazy sounding science fiction stuff. There was an interesting point that he made about kind of the distinction in languages between science fiction and fantasy. And he said, for example, if you write a story about someone, a virus transmitted by the bite of an infected person, which causes photophobia and a need for increased iron, that's science fiction. But if you say you're dealing with vampires, suddenly it's fantasy. It was an interesting article, and I thought kind of drew a nice line between writing for science versus writing for science fiction, and then the border between science fiction and fantasy. A couple others that I really enjoyed. The New Martian Way by Brendan Dubois was a locked room murder mystery on Mars, obviously. Pretty easy enough, right? Three people, one of them dies, Obviously, one or both of the other two is the killer, but the motive behind the murder was what made this one fairly interesting and fun. Uh, there's another locked door mystery, Slow Dance by Jay Werkheiser. This one set on a deep space mission into the Kuiper Belt. Another fun mystery presented kind of one sided, as it were, with investigators on the moon and the suspects still delivering their statements, still from their mission en route to the Kuiper Belt. Um, so, those were the fun stories that I really enjoyed in the March April issue of Analog. Join me again shortly, and I'll have another couple of weeks or so, and I'll have some breakdowns of some more stories and articles that I've read to share with you that you might enjoy. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.